There is a narrow passage of water in the Persian Gulf that holds the power to shake the entire world. Only about 54 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz sits between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. Every day, a significant portion of the world's oil supply passes through this strategic waterway. Military experts call places like this critical maritime choke points, locations where a single conflict could affect nations across the globe. If the Strait of Hormuz were ever blocked, the consequences could be immediate. Energy prices could rise, supply chains could collapse, and economies around the world could feel the impact. But here is the question that has fascinated many Bible scholars and prophecy researchers.
How could an ancient prophet, living more than 2,500 years ago, describe a future military conflict connected to a region that would one day become one of the most important locations on Earth? The prophet was not a modern strategist. He did not have satellite images, military maps, or knowledge of global oil markets. His name was Daniel. And according to the book of Daniel, he received visions describing kingdoms, wars, rulers, and events that would unfold long after his lifetime. The strange thing is this: Daniel never knew the name Strait of Hormuz. That name did not exist in 553 BC. Ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, and Persian records did not call this narrow passage by that name. To Daniel, it was simply part of the geography surrounding the Persian Empire. Yet in the final chapters of the book of Daniel, he describes a future campaign involving powerful kings, movements from the north and south, and a ruler who places his royal tents near the seas. A prophecy written thousands of years ago. A map drawn before modern nations existed.
And a question that continues to capture the imagination: did Daniel see something about our modern world? To understand the prophecy, we first need to understand the man who received it.
Many people know Daniel as the young man who survived the lion's den. But the Daniel of the biblical text was far more than a child in a famous story. The Daniel who received his final visions was an elderly man, possibly over 80 years old. He was no longer the teenager who had been taken from Jerusalem. He was a survivor, a prophet, a man who had witnessed the rise and fall of powerful empires. Daniel's story began with tragedy. After the Battle of Carchemish, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon conquered Jerusalem. The Babylonian king took treasures from the temple, including sacred vessels, and he also took people. Among those taken into exile were young men from the royal and noble families of Judah.
They were chosen because they were intelligent, physically capable, and suitable to serve in the Babylonian palace. Among them was Daniel. Alongside him were three other young men: Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Most people imagine the beginning of Daniel's story as a journey of greatness. But imagine it from Daniel's perspective. He was about 15 years old, a teenager torn away from his homeland, a prisoner walking into a foreign empire, a young man who watched Jerusalem disappear behind him, knowing he might never see it again. For a Jewish person in the 6th century BC, exile was not just losing a home, it was a spiritual crisis. Jerusalem represented God's presence. The temple represented worship. The land represented the promises given to their ancestors. And now Daniel was living in Babylon, surrounded by a culture that worshipped foreign gods. But Daniel made a decision. Even in a foreign land, he would remain faithful to the God of Israel. The Babylonian Empire tried to reshape him. They changed his education. They changed his environment. They even changed his name. But they could not change his faith. And that faith would eventually lead him into encounters that would reveal the future of nations.
The book of Daniel records several visions that revealed the rise and fall of kingdoms. In Daniel chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of a great statue made of different materials. God revealed to Daniel that the statue represented a succession of world empires. The head of gold represented Babylon. Other kingdoms would follow, including the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and later powers. Daniel's message was clear. Human kingdoms rise and fall, but God remains in control of history.
Later, in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel received another vision. He saw 4 great beasts rising from the sea, representing kingdoms that would dominate the earth. Then Daniel saw the coming of the Ancient of Days and the establishment of God's everlasting kingdom. But perhaps the most mysterious visions appear in Daniel chapters 10 through 12. These visions came during the reign of Cyrus,
king of Persia. Daniel was mourning and fasting for 21 days near the Tigris River when an angelic messenger appeared to him. The messenger revealed that there was a spiritual conflict happening behind the events of human history.
Daniel was told that earthly battles were connected to a greater unseen struggle. Then he was shown events involving future kings, wars, and conflicts. Daniel chapter 11 describes a long struggle between the king of the north and the king of the south. Many scholars connect portions of this prophecy to historical conflicts between the Seleucid and Ptolemaic kingdoms after the death of Alexander the Great. One of the most famous figures connected to this passage is Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Antiochus persecuted the Jewish people, desecrated the temple in Jerusalem, and became a major example of a ruler who opposed God's people. However, many prophecy interpreters believe Daniel's words also contain patterns that point toward future events. They see Daniel's descriptions as having both historical fulfillment and possible end-times significance. One of the most debated passages in Daniel appears near the end of chapter 11. Daniel describes a powerful ruler who moves through the region, conquering and establishing his authority. The prophecy says, "He shall pitch his palatial tents between the seas and the glorious holy mountain." For many readers, this verse raises an important question. Where exactly is this location? The glorious holy mountain is commonly understood as a reference to Jerusalem, but what about the location between the seas? Some prophecy researchers believe Daniel's description points toward a strategic region connected to the waters surrounding the Middle East. They argue that the movement of armies described in Daniel follows geographic patterns that are recognizable on modern maps. One area often discussed is the region surrounding the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. The reason is simple. Ancient Persia controlled territory surrounding this region. The major powers mentioned in Daniel's visions moved through the same lands that would later become some of the most strategically important areas in the world. However, it is important to understand that interpretations of Daniel's prophecy differ.
Some scholars see these passages as referring primarily to events already fulfilled in ancient history. Others believe they point toward future events connected to the end times. Either way, the message of Daniel remains the same. God sees history before it happens.
At the conclusion of Daniel's final vision, the angel tells him that the words are sealed until the time of the end. Daniel was shown things he could not fully understand. He wrote down what he saw. He preserved the message, but he did not live to see how history would unfold. The prophet who once walked beside the Tigris River could not see modern nations. He could not see satellites watching military movements. He could not see oil tankers passing through the Strait of Hormuz. He could not know how important that narrow passage would become thousands of years later. But according to the book of Daniel, he was shown a vision of events far beyond his own lifetime. Daniel never saw the Strait of Hormuz by name. He saw rivers, kingdoms, kings, and battles. He saw a world shaped by conflicts between nations.
He died in Persia. He is buried in Persia, in the same country whose modern name appears in the news every week in connection with exactly the tensions he describes. The prophet and the land of his prophecy share the same soil. And to the south of where he is buried, the waters of the Persian Gulf move toward the corridor that the entire world now monitors by satellite. 54 kilometers of water, illuminated at night by the lights of hundreds of oil tankers moving in both directions, watched by destroyers, tracked from orbit, calculated in global risk models, threatened in summit speeches, and negotiated in military agreements. The Strait of Hormuz, the name Daniel never knew, the geography he described. The angel told Daniel that the words were sealed until the time of the end, and when it came, the words would be opened. Not all at once, not with a dramatic announcement, but gradually,
as the historical landscape began to resemble the prophetic one. As readers with modern maps examined the world around them, they began to notice that the lines emerging in geopolitical analysis closely mirrored lines that had already been drawn in a different kind of ink, on a different kind of page.
He wrote down what he was shown, sealed it as he was instructed, and rested. The river still runs south. The strait still narrows. And somewhere in the distance, between what an old man saw in a vision on the bank of a river in 553 BC and what appears on a satellite screen tonight, a set of words that were sealed for 26 centuries may be, page by page, beginning to open.
If you found this story fascinating, make sure to like this video, share it with others who enjoy biblical mysteries, and subscribe to the channel for more stories, discoveries, and explanations from the Bible. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.